welcome to my channel. My name is Adam W. Rodriguez, and today I am going to be doing a book review of The Werewolf of Paris by Guy Endore. I've been wanting to read more werewolf books, and this is the beginning of a long series of werewolf stories that I plan on doing more book reviews about. But before I begin, I would like to invite you to subscribe to my channel. If you like videos about books and writing and art and painting and creativity and fun stuff like that, subscribe to my channel, like this video, hit that bell so that you get new notifications every time a new episode drops, and then maybe, hey, drop a comment in the comment section. I can talk about werewolves and monsters all day long. Cool, let's move on. The Werewolf of Paris. It was written by a fellow named Guy Endore. Guy Endore is a really interesting character. I'd like to talk about him a little bit before I get into the actual story itself. So Guy Endore was a writer in the, he's kind of started in the late 20s, early 30s. He lived all the way into the 1970s. He also wrote a lot of screenplays in Hollywood. He was nominated for Best Script. His script was called The Story of G.I. Joe, and it starred John Wayne. He was also a self-proclaimed communist. Like, he told everybody, I'm a bloody communist, which takes gigantic balls, especially in the 1950s, because that is the age of McCarthyism. If you don't know what McCarthyism is, it's based around this guy named Joseph McCarthy. He was this demagogue who demonized anybody that maybe identified as a socialist or a communist in any way, shape, or form. He would often drag these prominent people into these panels and accuse them of espionage. Some of them would even go to jail. Some of them lost their livelihoods, their houses, everything. I mean, many, many lives were ruined because of McCarthyism. Anyway, I don't want to go into a big, long history lesson. Why I'm bringing it up is that he himself got blacklisted. That is, people refused to work with him because of his political inclinations. He had to write under a pen name for a long time in that period. And he was one of those few guys who actually kind of survived the blacklisting, which makes Guy Endore an enduring and awesome author in particular. So I wanted to bring that up because his politics do kind of come in to this book a bit. Now, the book itself is a bit of horror fiction and historic fiction, and Guy Endore does a really, really good job of meshing the two. The historic landscape is set during the Franco-Prussian War, which I believe was in 1871. Well, specifically in 1871, there is this thing called the Paris Commune, where these communists took over Paris. And this was during the Franco-Prussian War. It was a lot of like internal strife within France itself, between the French from Versailles and the actual Parisians, which was currently being held by the Paris Commune. I'm not going to go into it too much because I'm not really a hardcore historian. I actually ended up learning a lot about it in this particular book. The book likes to name drop, and it actually brings up particular cases and stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool historic stuff going on in this book. If you're like a fan of that kind of history, this book will be a treat for you. And anyway, I was anticipating him being super, super preachy in this book because, Guy Endore being, who he was, such an activist. But the beginning of the book and throughout the book, it really didn't seem that preachy. In fact, he criticized the people in the commune, the people of the Paris Commune a lot, which I thought was interesting because Guy Endore was a communist, and yet the narrator of this book was sort of like criticizing them, right? But on the back end of the book, there's a lot of preachiness going on. But it's balanced well enough because it all goes into this kind of werewolf allegory. Anyway, let's talk a little bit more about the book. The book has been hailed by some as the Bram Stoker's Dracula of werewolf novels. You've got your titular Dracula to be, the vampire novel, and you've got Frankenstein as Frankenstein, and the Invisible Man's the Invisible Man, and the Phantom of the Opera is the Phantom of the Opera. But there's never been, or there's never been a set werewolf book that's supposed to be like the, you know, the seminal werewolf novel. But this one's one of those that many people have said, yeah, this will be the seminal werewolf novel. That's why I checked it out. And I did quite enjoy it. It does have kind of a classical feel to it. You can tell that Guy Endore was a fan of classical literature. So the book itself is, it's really cool because it's got this story within a story. I think they call it like a frame story. It's kind of like how the Illustrated Man works or the Books of Blood works. You know, you've got this guy who has the character is this nameless narrator who has come across these documents from these like these junk pickers or whatever. Anyway, he comes across these documents while he's in Paris doing this doctoral thesis. And it's all this curious accounts of this guy named Bertrand Callier. Bertrand Callier is the main character and the werewolf in The Werewolf of Paris. The whole first chunk of the book is the kind of framework for why Bertrand is how he is. He's not a werewolf who is a man that was bitten by a werewolf and is like scared of the next moon coming or next full moon coming. It's not one of those. He's a cursed man. He was born cursed. There's no fault of his own that he's actually a werewolf, right? So a lot of the old werewolf tropes, especially back in the old legends, it was about like deals with the devil or being cursed and stuff like that. That's how you became a werewolf in some of the folklore. So Bertrand doesn't really appear until like the first, you know, almost 100 pages or so. You learn about his ancestors at the very, very beginning of the book. And the chunk of the beginning is great because it's very savage and gory and it's everything that I want in a werewolf tale, right? It's got these two families that are in the midst of this bloody feud, and it's finally come to a head, and it gets really, really ghastly, really, really fast. And I was just like, wow, this is great. I hope the whole book is like this. The whole book wasn't quite like that, but there are moments that definitely got kind of ghastly and that kind of stuff. It goes from his ancestry into his mother and how his mother encounters this priest who shares the last name of one of these old ancestors. And this priest is a rapist. He ends up raping Bertrand's mother, and that's how Bertrand comes about. And then finally, like after the first 100 pages, Bertrand is finally born, and you got to go through a bit of his history there as he is raised. He has this sort of surrogate uncle who figures out that Bertrand is a werewolf, and he tries to do everything in his power to like help young Bertrand deal with this ailment that he has. Until finally Bertrand grows old enough to leave. He runs away and goes to Paris. And when he goes to Paris, this is about the same time that the siege is going on. And that's when he goes and he joins the guard in Paris and is trying to just kind of navigate being a young man who wants to be loved, who wants to be accepted by people around him, and stuff like that. And then his uncle, his surrogate uncle, kind of gives chase, only after reluctantly becoming a priest. Now, this is just all the setup. There's a whole lot of cool twists and turns that go on in the book. There's a lot of sex. There's a good amount of blood. There's a lot of masochism. And then there's all these really fun historical elements all throughout it. I think all in all, I really did enjoy the book. And like I said, it doesn't get too terrible preachy until it gets to the end, where Guy Endore is definitely doing some metaphorical business where he's talking about like how one werewolf can kill, you know, this many people, but, you know, and you call him a devil, you call him, you know, a monster, and yet, you know, here comes the French from Versailles, and they're like killing quintuple that amount. You know, they're killing, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of people, but you won't call them werewolves. You know, the world, it's a world of werewolves from his perspective by the end of the book. Like I said, it's a little preachy, but there's still a kind of a poetry about it that I do appreciate. And that's what I need in my gothic horror, man. I need a little bit of poetry. I need some metaphors, man. I need flowery language, and he does give me enough of that to where I'm pretty satisfied. for the most part. I'm going to give this here book an 8 out of 10. And it's mostly because he gets a little too preachy at the end. And honestly, I wanted a little bit more savagery. I've seen other people review this book, and some of them are like, it's a shocking book. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it's kind of shocking. I guess I'm sort of, I don't know, jaded because more modern horror just is more horrific. And this was written in 1933. So I can imagine in 1933, this was quite a, you know, pearl-clutching, oh my gosh. It was actually a bestseller. It was really well accepted right out the gate. And what's funny about it is this one wasn't really adapted into film, like the old Wolfman movie and all that kind of stuff. None of that was based off of Guy Endore. It was honestly our best friends over at Hammer Films who were finally the first ones to do anything that was remotely like The Werewolf of Paris. I believe the movie was called The Curse of the Werewolf, and it starred a very young Oliver Reed. I remember watching it a long time ago, and then I, watched it a little bit more when I was researching this particular book. It's a wonderful bit of cinema, and it's the only one that really tried to be anything like the Guy Endore book, although it really isn't. It's like set in Spain, and a bunch of weird stuff happens that does not happen in the book, but some of the stuff is kind of like lightly based off of Guy Endore's story. So that's worth watching. It's a Hammer film, so Hammer films are always worth watching. I mean, 8 out of 10 ain't bad. And Guy Endore was a really, really interesting person historically. I really enjoyed getting to do my little deep dives on the authors themselves. I ended up finding out all sorts of cool stuff. I didn't realize what an activist he was until after I read this book, and I remember getting to the end of it going, that was a little preachy near the end there. And then I read about Guy Endore, and I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's why, I love context outside of the book, because it really, I think, enriches the experience. At least for me, it does. So there is that. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this here review of The Werewolf of Paris. I know I enjoyed sharing my thoughts, and I hope you come back next time here at the Art of AWR. Ciao.